Good morning and welcome. My name is Eric Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Campaign Innovation. We're the research and development lab for the conservative movement. We are doing research, field tests, and trainings like this one to familiarize conservatives and campaigners about the latest strategies and tactics of campaigning. I'm really excited to have everyone here today. A couple of housekeeping items right up at the bat. Yes, this is being recorded. So it will be available if you have to step away. And as a result, you can come back and visit it and share it with other folks. So it will be available, and the slides are included as part of that. So you'll have access to that after the fact. We do have the ability to receive questions and chats. So I'm going to have that window open. We want this to be interactive and a two-way experience for you. Third housekeeping is we're going to have I'll drop polls and things like this from time to time. Curious to get everyone's feedback on this first poll of how familiar are you with the concept of relational organizing? If you're not familiar at all, that's okay. You're in the right spot. And if you are familiar but skeptical, we're going to try and change your mind and try and convince you about this new tactic. So looks like we're getting some good results in. I'll give it just a few more seconds. Seems like the winning option here is somewhat familiar. I'd like to use it. About half of voters, 48% of our very smart representative sample here say that they like to use it, and about a third, 35%, say they want to learn more. So you're in the right place. And for those of you who are familiar but skeptical, we want to address those concerns. And so to help me do that, I've got Will Long, who is the founder of Numinar. I'm going to bring him in just now. And Will and I are going to talk about relational organizing in a field test that we collaborated on in Florida. Good morning, Will. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk all things relational organizing.
Yeah, great. Well, so folks who may not be familiar with the Center for Campaign Innovation, one of the key things that we do is partner with innovators like Numinar to sort of build case studies and show folks in the conservative movement how to use this new technology and these new tactics. The thing that I love about relational organizing, though, is it's not really new. This is what we've been doing in campaigning for, I think, probably going back to ancient Greece, of talking to our friends and convincing them to vote for our preferred candidates. But Numinar and others in our industry have created technology to help scale that. And so to get started, I want to share the results from our field test that we did in Florida. And Will and I are going to have a conversation around that. And please drop your comments and questions in the chat. So thank you for doing that. And if you have questions or comments, we'll get to those. So a little bit about the Center for Campaign Innovation before we get started. So we test cutting edge tactics and tools in real world campaigns, helping political professionals adopt effective technology-driven strategies and fostering a culture of innovation in the conservative movement. We are a 501c4 nonprofit organization. Here's the challenge that we're up against, Will, and you're obviously very familiar with this from your perch at Numinar, which tries to contact voters through several of these channels. So this is some pretty eye-opening data, I think, from our 2024 post-election survey here at the Center for Campaign Innovation. We found that just 26% of voters in 2024 said they have a landline. As we know, landlines are probably the most reliable way to get someone's phone number. It's typically what we're able to find from the voter file. But one of the really interesting things is that we saw this kind of cross over the last 4 years. So we used to have about 40% of voters had a landline, and over the last 4 years, so between 2020 and 2024, it's now gone down to just 26% of voters. Another sort of alarming statistic here is that we saw a 10-point decrease in phone call contact from campaigns. Now, that's obviously a function of it's getting harder to reach people. There are fewer landlines. Will, give us a little bit of the context here around landline phone calling and how that as a tactic is starting to shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like you said, so Numinar, we have a sort of voter outreach platform that does phone banking as well as texting and canvassing. So we're sort of in the sort of mix of voter contact methods that kind of are used currently. So with phone calls, I think what we're seeing is just, it's harder and harder to get people to pick up. You mentioned sort of, the ability to start labeling calls from people that they don't know. I personally get maybe like 10 calls a day from numbers that I don't recognize. They're typically labeled spam, which kind of helps me, make sure not to pick them up. But every now and then I still pick one up and, have to ask someone to remove me from their database. So people are just kind of getting inundated with those kinds of calls. And so it's harder and harder to get people to pick up from a phone number that they don't recognize. But the same goes for, I think everyone's very familiar with the plight of like political texting and how that's kind of gotten maybe overused, or certain people are getting that are getting inundated by political texting and sort of just zoning it out. So we have a similar problem there. And then with canvassing too, I think we were also seeing, similar issues where, you mentioned doorbell cameras, definitely part of the issue, but I think people, especially in battleground states, if you're getting your door knocked every week, every other week, people are just starting to, put no solicitation signs up and sort of not open the door either. And so I think we did probably 50 million voter contacts when it came to, calling and phone banking and texting last year. And these are kind of some of the trends we've been seeing through the work that we do.
Yeah, and there's kind of this vicious cycle too with these landline telephones, because we are able to do things like robocalls to landlines that we're not able to do to cell phones, and so the remaining few people who have landlines are getting more calls than ever before. And as you point out, one of the we have been tracking for a while how voters actually use technology to block campaign contact, and we found that 22% of voters report using apps to block unwanted calls and texts. If we were looking at just donors, that figure jumps to from 1 in 5 to a third. 1 in 3 donors are actively blocking texts and calls with these apps. So again, our contact rates are just continuing to take a hit, and that's sort of both a challenge of technology blocking on one hand and us kind of over inundating on the other, because we're kind of running out of ways to reach voters. And then, as you mentioned, the doorbell camera, I have conflicting thoughts about doorbell cameras. On one hand, they let you make sure that you're not opening the door for someone who comes by and wants to talk about a political campaign, but it also could mean that you see someone came by your door when previously we would just have to, put a door hanger there and it might blow away, or the opponent's campaign might come and take it away. So I'm really interested in thinking about how is this like a targeted impression, in fact. So against this background, we have this huge challenge, right? Where, Numinar faces this too, where we're trying to contact voters and they want to do everything but be contacted. So one of the tactics that we have seen used pretty reliably on the left is called relational organizing. And so that does seem like a buzzword, and people remembering the Obama era, he was a community organizer. It does kind of have this connotation to it that might sound harsh to a conservative's ear, but but walk us through at a high level, and then we're going to dig in just a minute to the specific app. But walk us through this piece of how relational organizing works.
Yeah, well, I think broadly the idea is it's getting harder to get a political message through to our target voters through the sort of conventional voter contact methods. So, or via cold contact is kind of what I'd call it, like getting a message from someone that you don't know, like a text message from a phone number you don't recognize, or a phone call from a volunteer you don't know, etc. So the idea, I think the core idea here is get a political message through via someone that voter knows. So like a friend or a family member or someone who would be in their contacts, where, if I'm getting a text from Eric Wilson, I'm far more likely to read that and be more engaged by that than if it's from, a number that I don't recognize. And so, that's obviously not like a new concept, like you said. People have been telling their friends and people they know about candidates or issues or products that they care about forever. I think it really comes down to sort of, how can we productize this, or what kind of how can we systematize this to actually enable us to do this at any sort of real scale?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what, like you mentioned, the Democrats have been building the last maybe 4 or 6 years. With especially there's I think an app called Reach that's been really maybe the center point for these efforts on their side. But that's essentially the core idea.
Yeah, and so in practice, this works from campaigns where you recruit volunteers, the people who you want to have take action. They're going to download an app, and then the app helps match those contacts back to a voter file. And so then we ask those folks to text their friends. And so the idea is, as you pointed out, messages from friends and family have more influence than campaign outreach, and it's harder to block those, right? If you want your friend to be able to invite you over for a party or an event or something, you're not going to block them, and so that's sort of the idea. And as you mentioned, the left have been doing this for a number of years through different apps, and we've been watching the academic studies that show, depending on how you target it and set up the experiment, they're getting an 8 to 13 point increase in turnout from relational organizing. And so as the conservative movement relies on increased turnout, it's been a kind of inversion over my career in politics, where we really benefit from having more voters turn out. We're having to look at, okay, well, how can we boost turnout? So do you want to share kind of the workflow on how Numenor does relational organizing, just to give our viewers like a really clear understanding of that?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to. So, just I have, just a couple screens here so people can kind of it can be a little bit more concrete how this could kind of work in practice. So, what we're doing is we're giving our volunteers the ability via an app to essentially, what we call help your friends vote. And what that does is it gives you the ability to sync your contacts from your phone against the voter file. And then once you do give us access to your contacts and we do that match with the voter file, then we can sort of display all of the people who who are, for example, low propensity Republicans in Virginia Congressional District 7, for example. But you can really target it to any subset of the voter file that you're looking for. And then you can see, for example, their ABEV status. So if it's a turnout focused, operation, you can identify which of those voters need to request a mail-in ballot or return a mail-in ballot, or have already voted, or who have not even registered to vote. Really, all of the above, and you can kind of push people to do the relevant kind of thing that they need to do. There's this sort of you can pre-fill, a text message that you want your volunteer to send, and maybe they can personalize it themselves. But then once you sort of, send that text message, I think the thing that makes the sort of twist on it that we're sort of incorporating is this ability to actually get paid for doing that outreach.
Yeah.
So, if you pay your volunteers $1, $2, $5 per friend that they text, all of a sudden, it's not just your hardcore volunteers who are willing to do this, but it's potentially people who are not even politically engaged. And so I think that really is the key to scaling it.
And we'll get to the paid in just a moment, but I want to address something that we sort of hear frequently, just as a practical matter. This, again, just to be very clear about it, this text is coming from your phone. So if I download the Numenar app and I text Will, it's going to come from my personal phone number, not a campaign phone number. It'll already be saved in Will's contacts. And so people ask us, well, what happens if they, we don't have control over the message in the way that we might with a P2P. And I always point out that, if someone's going to be a jerk, it's under their own name to their own friend, and they could do that with or without an app. So that sort of, some people really bristle when they think about like a volunteer being able to edit a text. Really what you're doing here is providing with the data and the targeting and the motivation.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're making it very easy for them to have enough information about their friends to make it very easy to know which friends to text, what to text them, and just make it, a matter of a couple of clicks to be able to do. But I think another thing to highlight is that, the benefit of relational organizing, the reason that we're seeing like 8 to 13% turnout rate or point, lifts is not necessarily just because that text message is from someone that is in your contacts versus someone who's not. It's also just because, if you think about it, like, humans, we naturally kind of determine a lot of our behavior is determined by what people around us think. Just for better or for worse, it matters a lot to us if our friends or our family members are voting for a certain candidate or asking us to do a certain thing. That whole dynamic, that social dynamic is just a lot more built into the way that we actually come up with our decisions of who to vote for, versus really any other sort of outreach we could kind of do.
Right. And yes, and it's incredibly powerful. And to your point about the paid incentives, again, this is something that we're seeing on the left, and our side is adapting. I think Elon Musk has been probably one of the biggest innovators in paid incentives. What you're what adding that layer of sort of incentive on allows us to get the scale that we need, and we'll see in just a minute how really powerful that was for our field test. So just to talk to us a little bit, briefly about kind of the verification and validation on the incentives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think like you said, the paid component is, I think, what takes this from something that it's a cool tool that you can kind of give to your volunteers or your supporters to help you with here and there, to something that we can actually treat like any other sort of paid voter contact channel that's sort of infinitely scalable. If you can say something like, I want to target 1 million voters, I'm willing to pay, X dollars per impression, and know that you're not going to be budget constrained. You're going to be, you're not going to be sort of recruitment constrained. You're going to be budget constrained. I think that's what makes this a lot more compelling of a tool. And but to get to your point, obviously, anytime you're paying people to do any sort of campaign activity, whether that's paid doors or paid phones, there's always going to be, an incentive. You always have to do the quality assurance checking.
Right.
I do think that's sort of the direction that campaign activity is moving towards, is that people are going to need to be incentivized to do more of this kind of outreach. So yeah, the QA is important. The way we do it is we just sort of we randomly select text conversations that you record and ask you to sort of submit screenshots of that activity. So we make sure the timestamp is right, the message is right, And that helps us screen out people who aren't necessarily doing this.
Some of the bad actors. I want to get to a couple of questions here. The first one I'm going to hand over to you, which is who creates the message and who sends it to the message, and who sends it the message through your phone?
Yeah, great question. So, whoever's setting up the campaign or the sort of relational organizing project, they can kind of determine the pre-filled message that gets template, the template message that's in there. And you can tailor that based off of, for example, a voter's ABEV status. So you could send a different message for people who need to request a ballot versus need to, get registered to vote versus need to return a ballot. So you can kind of customize it based off of voters' characteristics or their ABEV status, et cetera. But then the person actually doing the sending is the actual volunteer, the person who actually knows that end target voter. That they're the ones actually hitting send. So they can technically personalize that message. And I think that's where we see the most powerful messaging come through, is where it's that core message that you're including, that the campaign's including, but it's being personalized.
Yeah. And then I want to get to one more question. Thanks for sending these questions in. We're going to get to all of them. And I think we can answer a few of them in our next slides, but I'm going to do one more question from John. Can I control which of my contacts I share? Some of our general business contacts that I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, there is the ability to sort of, I think if you use like iPhone, for example, you can select a subset of your contacts to sync. But even if you don't do that, you can still see a list of all of your contacts, but that doesn't mean you necessarily have to text every single one. You can kind of pick and choose, which people are relevant. All those people are going to live in the district and be target voters, but you
don't have to send a message to them if you don't feel comfortable talking about politics with them. And I think another important point to add here is that you're matching this back to the voter file. And so if your plumber's number is saved, that's likely not the number that's going to come up with their voter registration. So there are going to be things like that. But the volunteer always has total control. It's not like the campaign is, taking over taking over your phone and sending out messages on your behalf. All right, we'll get back to some of these other questions in just a minute. I want to dig back into our presentation. And so talk a little bit about the field tests that we run. So we wanted to demonstrate that relational organizing could be effective amongst conservative voters, because heretofore all of the data we've seen were from groups on the left. And so this was a lot of questions about, are people going to download the app? Are they going to text? Is it going to actually have the similar effect? And so we went to Florida last year and looked at low propensity registered Republicans in Florida. So these are people who are registered, and in Florida you select whether you want to be a Republican, Democrat, or undeclared. And these are people who weren't necessarily new voters, but hadn't voted frequently. I think we did ones and fours, or 1 of 4 and 2 of 4 voters. And so we were really interested in this low propensity, which kind of goes to one of the questions that we saw earlier about increasing turnout in a low turnout cycle, because we were really interested in how do we get these people who don't normally vote to show up and vote. And so in addition to that, because we were running an experiment, we created this control group. Explain the control group just really briefly here about how we, I guess, withheld some contacts.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll quickly say though, before this, I think there were kind of, in my mind, at least like 2 or 3 big questions about relational organizing as a concept that I think we were hoping to try to validate with this field test. I think one was obviously, like, does this actually have any real effect on voters? Like, is there actually any real meaningful difference between a text you get from a number you don't recognize versus a friend that you know? And is it anything like what the Democrats were seeing with, something like 8 to 13% lift in turnout, which, for context, is just 10, 20 times bigger any other sort of effect size we see.
Yeah, we're excited if we get 1 or 2%. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that was one big question that we wanted to test. I think the other was, is this something like people are willing to do, as in sync their contacts and text their friends, and is it something that we can do at scale? Because if we can get a couple hundred people to do it, that's great and nice. But for this to be a meaningful, change in overall the way that campaigns do voter contact, it needs to be something that we can do at any sort of scale that we want. So I think those are the two big questions. The control group, essentially, that was a way for us to test that first question of whether this is going to actually have a meaningful effect on turnout likelihood. So essentially, the way we did it is, we're targeting these low propensity registered Republicans. So those are the only people who would get synced to your contact list. So you're not seeing contacts that aren't low propensity registered Republicans. But then even within that target group of contacts, we're randomly withholding, I believe it was a quarter of those matched contacts. So, I would randomly not see some number of contacts that I could have texted, but didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows us to essentially compare, okay, well, what happened between people who were texted versus people who weren't texted, and try to understand, once after the election, what the turnout rates were like between the control group and the treatment group.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, we wanted to test sort of your old-fashioned P2P texting that a lot of campaigns use, and see what the turnout effect was there. And so our results, to get there, we offered an incentive, about, I think it was $5 per voter you texted, up to $500. And so we targeted about 500,000 low propensity registered Republicans in our relational universe. Important to remember that if someone was not in this universe, we were going to P2P text them as a way of comparison. But so we sent out 400,000 recruitment texts saying, earn $500 by texting your friends in Florida to vote, and they received this incentive. And then once everything was said and done with our quality control and vetting and things like that, we identified 101 volunteers who were recruited and participated in this experiment. Talk to us a little bit more about how you deploy this kind of recruitment effort.
So for us, we just we have a sort of texting tool with a Numenar, and so we put together this little sort of recruiting message. We also put together a landing page, turnoutthevotefl.com, that kind of just summarized the basics of how to download the app, how to seek your contact, how to get paid, and it was great because that was a link that people could then forward or share with people that they knew. And so that's what we saw a lot of, is volunteers sharing it with their friends, and having their friends sign up and do the exact same thing. So we just texted people who were hard GOP voters who would be most likely to do this, and then essentially, people could go to the website, sign up themselves, and get paid all by themselves.
Yeah. And so let's get to the good news here. We found that from those 101 volunteers, 1,738 messages were sent. So these 1,700 voters received a text message from someone that they knew had saved their contacts, which I think is a really good yield on that kind of recruitment effort. And we waited patiently until the Florida Secretary of State got our election results back. And those people who received a text from one of their friends were 8.6 percentage points more likely to go out and vote. Now, remember who we were texting, right? We were texting low propensity voters. These are not people who go all the time. These are people who maybe go about a quarter of the time, or maybe half of the time. And we got them to increase their turnout by 8.6 points compared to those who were withheld, right? So it was a really astonishing finding, I think, and put us right in line with what we're seeing in the academic studies from the left.
Yeah,
Yeah, talk a little bit about the results here and what they mean from someone who works on voter contact every day.
yeah, totally. I mean, I think we would have been happy with something even like 4% turnout lift would have been pretty incredible. So I think this number is yeah, it's definitely a huge improvement on top of pretty much anything else that any other type of voter contact channel that we're seeing. I think we also did this experiment in Arizona as well, and that was about maybe 8 or 9x larger of an experiment, and saw about a 7.8%, I think, lift. So we tried this in a couple of different geographies, and I think everywhere we saw that both the turnout effect is very substantial, and that we can really that this can be scaled. Even 10,000 voters is not necessarily huge, but if I think with higher budgets, essentially, and people who are willing to do this at greater scale, it just goes to show that people are willing to sign up to do this, to volunteer, and the whole payment process can work. And it's something where people can just kind of say, hey, I want to target this universe, I have this budget, go, and then we can see effects like this.
Yeah, and so this goes to a question that Ted asked earlier. How do we increase turnout in a low turnout cycle? And I think our results show that relational organizing is one of those ways that we can do that. So this was a field test with low propensity voters, so people even in a presidential year who would have been low turnout.
Right, and I think
we were able to mobilize them.
One thing we were seeing last cycle is that low propensity voters or people who are newly registered, we also don't have a lot of data on them. We don't necessarily have their phone number. We don't necessarily have an up to date cell phone number or email, or there aren't a lot of ways to contact these voters. And so I think relational organizing is really interesting, because even for someone a rural voter who's politically unengaged, maybe a first time voter, they still know plenty of people in their community. And so as long as we can find one of those people, they can give us the information about, well, this is that person's phone number. This is how we contact them. And by the way, we have an in essentially with those voters. So we think this is a really unique way to specifically reach low propensity voters, or new voters, people who aren't even registered, who we don't know about.
Right. And you raise a very important point, which is, canvassing, going door to door, which we know is, sort of before some of this evidence, one of the most effective ways to mobilize voters, is not easily done in rural districts where conservatives typically rely on turnout. But everyone's got a phone and text, and so this is a good way to kind of overcome that disadvantage. All right, and so a couple of things, just to round out the findings is, we learned that yes, this does work on conservatives. So conservatives will turn out with relational organizing. I think one of the things that we want to do is have more time to deploy that. We would see probably better uptake, but part of our experiment design was we wanted to keep the treatment very narrowly focused so we could make sure that we were measuring our effect. And so some of those self-imposed constraints. But imagine starting this months ahead of Election Day. We just began right when early voting opened in Florida, for example. And then I think another thing, and you can speak to this, Will, that we, if you have an actual identifiable candidate, someone that people are passionate about doing the recruitment, you'll have probably better recruitment success.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was funny. We had a lot of Republicans who were responding to our recruiting text saying that, hey, I'm a Trump supporter. I'm a Republican, so I'm not going to do this. Which is kind of yeah, so I wanted to say, oh no, we're, this is the, but yeah, no. So having a candidate or a specific issue there is definitely helpful. For this one, we had to keep the messaging super abstract. We're just, Turnout, Florida, and that was the whole mission. But yeah, so I think having a more identifiable candidate or cause is definitely going to be helpful there. And I think we only started this maybe a couple of weeks out from the election. I think with longer time frame, more budget, I think this can be a much bigger operation.
Yeah, and one of the other really interesting things is we tested incentives, and these incentives do work. We were able to deploy them in a way that, as we see from our test results, were effective. Like we got votes for those incentives, and it was a way to help scale. And I think, folks who have known me for a while know I'm generally more of a movement, let's work hard on campaigns kind of person. But the evidence is really clear here that these incentives, whether it's for paid door knocking or paid relational organizing, are so critical for getting the kind of scale and reach that we need, especially with these low propensity voters. And I think we have to start thinking about this more of, we're redistributing the money that we would otherwise be spending. So instead of that money going to your peer-to-peer texting campaign, now it's going to your relational campaign. Instead of paying for a TV ad, that one additional spot, we're now going to run our relational program. So thinking about it of a replacement. I want to get to, and then the final thing that was kind of a bonus surprise at the end of the test that we did not consider, is that we have this really powerful social graph of all of these voters, of who do they know, and there are some potential use cases for that.
Yeah, no, I think the social graph is a kind of difficult to understand concept because it's not something we've ever really had as a party. But it's really powerful. A voter file, we have data on individual voters and people who are registered to vote. In a social graph, we know how those voters know each other.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's related, and that can be extremely powerful for persuasion. It can be powerful for even just helping us do relational organizing more effectively in the future, because now instead of having to try to find someone who knows every target voter, I know exactly for every target voter who could reach them.
Right.
It's also giving us a whole bunch of new data that is not necessarily in the voter file about, for example, low propensity Republicans. So that data is coming in. Now we have more contact information than we did before.
Yeah, and I want to get to Zeke's question here because it's a good one. One of the reasons why we picked Florida. He's asking, how do we make sure that we only text people that are in one party or another? And I think we'll talk about kind of the other data that you can layer on this, and maybe in states where you don't have party registration.
Yeah, so so you can define a target universe of voters that you want to be sending relational texts to, however you would like, and so you can define those as Republicans. You can define that by geography. You can define that by turnout propensity.
In the case of Texas, you would have past primary history, right?
Yep. Or if you don't have partisanship, you can also pull in like a model, like a voter score model, and target modeled conservatives. So yeah, you can really slice and dice it however you would like, so that you're only paying, if you're doing paid relational for,
you're only incentivizing the contacts that you want, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not paying people to text, people who are going to show up and vote for the other party or something like that.
Yeah.
And I want to add too, this is something that's really important for our conservative movement now, is turning out new voters. And so we don't even, you don't even have to be texting voters. You could even say, okay, who are the people who are in your contacts that aren't on the voter file, and can you register them?
Totally.
All right. So great question. Thanks, Zeke. let me get to some other questions here. There's some practicalities about Numenar pricing. We'll save that for the end. Isaac has a good question here. How much pushback have you seen among volunteers and concerns of their contact list being used by a third party?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think obviously, people are syncing their contacts, and that data is being uploaded into Numenar so that we can do this voter file match. But that's it. We're not sharing that externally or with with a third party or anything like that. So that's kind of how we explain it, to our volunteers. Is you are providing access to your contacts so that we can do a voter file match, and that data can be used by Numenar to essentially help facilitate the relational organizing experience. So I would say there are people do raise that as maybe a sort of a block or something that maybe they wouldn't want to sort of do relational organizing. I think that's where I would say we don't get that that sort of concern nearly as much as you would think. But even where we do, oftentimes what we're seeing is that especially with paid relational, people are more than happy to sync their contacts in the way that they would any other their Google Maps app or their Uber app, or if it means 500 being able to sort of make $500 texting their friends. So
yeah, most of those apps don't even pay you for taking all of your data.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that data, that contact data does get stored within Numenar, and so that for example, if you came back later and wanted to do more relational organizing or do relational organizing with a different campaign, that data would still be there. But like I said, so Numenar keeps it, but we're not distributing it externally.
Yeah, and I think a key, this all comes down to the communication with the volunteers and being able to answer the question of like, who has this data and what is it being used for. We know in the tech space that this data is already out there. What Numenar is doing is connecting it and really making it more convenient for the volunteer, for the supporter, even if they're not being incentivized. But I've heard of some campaigns sort of using this as, hey, if you do this, you don't have to knock doors, right? Because you're contacting, you're going to mobilize more people doing this than you would doing a morning of doors. And so it is kind of a worthy trade-off. Questions. I want to get to some more of the technical questions. Okay, so another one from Zeke in Texas. What information from people's contacts can we collect for our campaigns? Are there any privacy issues we need to know about? So we're collecting cell phone numbers. That's really what's being collected, right?
Yeah, cell phone numbers is primarily sort of what's being used. Technically, if there are other fields in the contacts, email, address, things like that, we can use that too. And maybe in the future, we'll probably use that to do some of the fuzzy matching with the voter file. But I think what we'd love to do is be able to sort of start, in the future iteration of this, is to just display that here are the people in the voter file who were matched by you or one of your supporters or volunteers, so that you can start keeping a database of everyone who you or someone on your campaign is connected to. So even for like a local race, if there's 100,000 people in your district or in your city, if you could just find a couple dozen volunteers or friends to sync their contacts and do this, you could potentially have cover a lot of that voter file with just people that or someone that volunteers for your campaign knows.
Yeah, and again, I go back to this point, which is a relevant one, which is we already have this data. We already have the cell phone numbers, and so a campaign could, in theory, send P2P text. What this step does is allows the supporters to let a campaign know who they know, and so that those the campaign saving costs from texting. It's more effective. It's a um, uh, it's a more effective contact. Good question here from Andrew. How do you prevent multiple people from sending to the same contact? Or is there data that indicates if one low prop voter is contacted by multiple people about voting for a specific candidate, they are more likely to vote for that candidate? So I should have mentioned this in kind of the presentation of our study, which is once someone was contacted, we took them out of the universe. So we weren't, these people weren't getting multiple relational contacts. That is definitely a study for another day. I think that there's probably a benefit to more of kind of follow up, but as we see, there can be too much of a good thing. And so probably if this one poor person is on a lot of phones getting bombarded, probably going to start seeing a backfire effect.
Yeah, but it's kind of up to however the campaign wants to set it up. If they want to do multiple contacts or just be one and done. It could maybe it's, you might want to have multiple touches if it's a persuasion campaign versus a turnout campaign or something like that.
Yeah. And then let's see, I'm trying to get all the questions here before we get into some specifics on Numenar. Did we test the impact of incentive size? We did not test the impact of incentive size, so we could have said, you're going to get more there are so many ways that you can structure this. It could be instead of $5 per friend you contacted, you could do $10 per friend. Instead of we could ratchet up the payout based on how many people you text. But I think the way I think of incentive is more of like, thank you for your time. Thank you for supporting this campaign, because that's money that we would have spent, if you're a campaign elsewhere. But we'd rather it go to you, our supporters, because what you're doing is more effective. And we've been appreciating volunteers with free pizza and hanging out at the campaign headquarters, gas money, things like that. This is just kind of a new iteration of this, because we have this direct to consumer kind of technology, and we can do the verification at scale. Do talk a little bit about that $500 threshold is an important one, though, right, Will?
Yeah. So in terms of the payment processing, typically the way it works is the campaign loads a balance into Numenar, and then Numenar will handle all of the automated essentially we just automatically email gift cards to the volunteers once they've done their relational organizing outreach. There's no paperwork involved until you start paying people regularly and above. I think it's a $600 threshold where you have to start issuing 1099s, and there's a little bit more paperwork there, which may still end up being worth it in a future iteration of Numenar, but or of relational organizing. But at least just for this last year, to keep things simple, we just sort of set that cap so that we essentially didn't have to do any sort of paperwork.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a lot of new research ideas here for future experiments. We're already thinking about, okay, well, we did it for Turnout. Are there other things that we can do? Question about match rates. So what sort of match rate did you do we typically see for cell phones?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think this was another open question that I had when we were doing this field test. Is, how feasible is this given the quality of the data? And I was pleasantly surprised. I'm trying to remember the exact match rate that we were seeing. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was something between like 25 to 50%, something in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Which was pretty reasonable. And I think part of the benefit of something like this is not even just doing the outreach; it's also collecting the data, not just the first party data, but even your volunteers could tell you, hey, Ellie Long, matches to, or sorry, someone who's in your phone as like, mom might match to May Long in the voter file.
Yeah.
And that doesn't look right, but we could tell essentially the campaign, this is the same person, or no, this isn't the right person. It's actually this other person. And so we can do some of that fixing of the match and improve the phone number match quality, both by adding phone numbers where they don't exist currently, or by fixing phone numbers where they're currently associated with the wrong voter. So, that's a huge benefit we see out of this is honestly just fixing phone number quality. But then also, being able to collect all sorts of other data. What issues does this voter care most about? Or, how do you know them? Is it a friend, a colleague, someone from church? There's all sorts of questions we can collect from our volunteers, short of even just, sending them outreach.
Yeah, and the other thing the Trump campaign spent a lot of time thinking about what they called them contact gaps, right? Where are the people that, maybe we had an address for, but we didn't have phone number, or we had email, but not phone number, or, address. And they spent a lot of time trying to match that together. And so if you think about, even the best campaign in the country is trying to fill in data gaps, and then this is an important part of the experience. And then I would point out that we, even with the current match rates, we were having plenty of people to connect them with to contact, right? So it wasn't like there were people uploading their contacts and having no one to text. Like you have 10, 15, 20 people that you could send a text. All right, so I want to leave some time here for you to talk about some of the kind of the practicalities around Numenar, but I want to share with folks, they can go read the full report at campaigninnovation.org, read our full study, talk a little bit more about the background of relational organizing, and be sure and check that out. And we've got lots of other research there. So, Will, some of the questions came in, what is the cost to add on relational organizing if we already have the Numenar app? What is, is there a cost for the incentives? Talk to a little bit, about the pricing around Numenar and some of these practicalities.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, we just, given the results and given everything we're seeing, we want relational organizing to be in the toolkit of pretty much every campaign. Hopefully, this next election, it's something we think everyone should have access to. So, in terms of actually just getting access, there's sort of the volunteer route and there's the paid route. If you're doing the volunteer route, it's just a monthly subscription to Numenar. That's pretty much it. It's something that can be set up and stood up very, very quickly. If anyone's interested, they can just go to numenar.com, hit get started, and talk to Lauren from our team and get set up very quickly. And then on the paid side, essentially all we do is we sort of charge like a 20% processing fee on top of whatever relational incentive budget that you're putting up there. And that pretty much covers the QA, the payment processing, but also the recruitment. So we actually—
And QA is what?
Oh, sorry, quality assurance. So making sure that people are actually doing the texts that they're saying that they are. So we pretty much handle everything. All you do is, you say, we try to make it very easy for people to say yes to making this part of their toolkit. So something like, here's a target audience, here's a budget, hit go, and now, we'll handle the rest for you. It can pretty much be used by anyone, not even just a campaign. People want to get people to sign up, potentially to sort of fundraise. I think there are a lot of really interesting use cases of leveraging people's social networks to drive some sort of action. So I guess I would say, yeah, for anyone who's interested in learning more, or sort of even just getting this set up for themselves, just visit our website, numenar.com, and we'd love to sort of
yeah, and I've just shared a link, Will, so folks can go schedule a demo with the link if you want to learn more about Numenar. There are also other options out there in the field, and so from our perspective at the Center for Campaign Innovation, we want our side to be using relational organizing, no matter who you work with. But I will say a personal word of thanks to Will and his team. for putting up with my questions and getting this experiment designed exactly right and helping us get the data. So if you are interested in learning more, not only are they sort of experts on their platform, but they're experts on deploying relational organizing, and they'd be happy to chat with you. And a couple of questions that were coming in that we can answer here, and some others like data and costs and things like that. That's going to require learning more about your use case. So can this be used in a primary? Yes, absolutely. So can a town committee buy into this, or is it just a state committee to decide? Take that to a yes. Yeah. From Will. He's happy to sell to anyone. All right. Well, I want to make sure that we keep this to our hour here. I really appreciate Will Long for joining us. I'm going to leave the link up to their Calendly page so you can get in touch, schedule something at their convenience. Again, word of thanks to the Numenar team for their help on this field test. They were great partners in it, and look forward to learning more about what you come up with. So thanks for being with us, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Eric.
All right. And for those of you who are joining us, thank you so much for being here with us live. Those of you watching the recording, we appreciate you also checking it out. I would encourage you to go to campaigninnovation.org to learn more about our organization, to sign up for email updates. So you see when we're doing new events. So we're regularly doing webinars. For those of you who are in the Washington, D.C. area, we have in-person events from time to time, but we're always sharing news and updates and looking for interesting questions to study, like, does relational organizing work? So if you have ideas or big questions about, will this work for my campaign? Is this something I should be doing? Is this new technology worth my time and investment? We want to be your partners in that. And so please do reach out. Eric@campaigninnovation.org is the best way to get in touch with me, and look forward to seeing you at a future event, and appreciate you making the time to be with us today. Hope everyone has a good rest of their day.